Hello, my name is Marco from Culiacan. Let's learn together the memory verse from Lesson 4 found in Joshua chapter 10, verse 14. And there was no day like that before it or after it, that the Lord hearkened unto the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. God bless you.
From the moment Israel crossed the Red Sea, God's plan was clear. He himself would fight for his people. The divine ideal never included human armies or military strategies. Victory was meant to be the result of trust, not of the sword. But the unbelief of the people changed the course of history. Their lack of faith led them to a second-best option, a life in which God, in His mercy, had to descend to the level of their spiritual immaturity. Even where the heart distrusted, God continued to work, not according to His perfect purpose, but according to His redemptive one. The history of Israel teaches that God does not abandon His people, even when they do not walk the ideal path. He accompanies them in their detours, teaches through consequences, and turns their mistakes into lessons. War was a divine concession, not an original command. The God who had defeated Egypt without a single spear now allowed His people to wield weapons, not to glorify violence but to strengthen their faith. Thus, the battles in the desert and the conquest of Canaan became spiritual classrooms where Israel learned, step by step, that victory depended not on their strength, but on the faithfulness of God. The accounts in Exodus chapter 17 and Joshua chapter 6 illustrate that same principle. In both cases, victory came not from military skill but from divine intervention. God remained the main actor. His people only had to trust, obey, and persevere. In the end, war became the mirror in which Israel was to see its own weakness reflected, and the sufficiency of the God who fights for His people. Welcome, my name is Augusto Palacios and this is Studying the Lesson. Thursday, October 23rd. The second best option. The book of Exodus chapter 17 presents the first armed conflict of Israel after the Exodus, the battle against the Amalekites. It was a critical moment. Just freed from Egypt, the people began to murmur and doubt God's presence. Their unbelief left them vulnerable, and Amalek seized the opportunity. It was no coincidence. God allowed that confrontation to teach them to trust Him again. On the battlefield, Moses raised his hands as a symbol of intercession and dependence. When his arms were lifted, Israel prevailed. When he tired, the enemy gained ground. The lesson was clear: victory depended on connection with God, not on human ability. The image of Moses with his hands raised is a powerful metaphor for spiritual life. Every time prayer rises, the enemy retreats. Every time faith weakens, the battle turns. Israel learned that intercession sustained its destiny. Aaron and Hur, supporting Moses' hands, represented the role of the faith community, believers supporting one another so that prayer would not cease and trust would not wane. War, though the consequence of unbelief, became a school of dependence. Over time, this lesson was repeated in different ways. In book of Joshua chapter 6, before the walls of Jericho, God again showed that His power does not depend on human strategy. Instead of catapults and swords, He commanded trumpets and obedience. For 7 days the people were to march silently around the city, and on the seventh day shout. The instruction seemed irrational, but there lay the principle of the kingdom. The power of God acts when faith obeys without questioning. Jericho fell not by human force, but by the faithfulness of the God who keeps His word. However, between the Exodus and Jericho, something had changed. Israel now had to take part actively in the battle. God was still leading, but the people had to wield the sword. War, though necessary in that context, was a pedagogical concession. God descended to the level of his people, not to legitimize violence, but to strengthen their faith in the midst of it. He showed them that even when they fought, victory still belonged to him. In every battle he reminded them, I am the one who fights for you. The book of Deuteronomy chapter 20 codified this new reality, the law of war. After 40 years in the desert, Israel needed structure to face the consequences of its own unbelief. What had begun as an act of divine intervention became a process of cooperation. The people had to act, but under the authority and direction of God. War became a stage where obedience and faith were tested. The size of the enemy or the strength of their walls did not matter. The key was always the same: the Lord is with you, do not be afraid. Throughout the conquests, God demonstrated that his power could manifest itself both in stillness and in action. When the people trusted, even enemy armies collapsed without a fight. In 2nd Book of Chronicles chapter 20, for example, when Jehoshaphat faced a formidable coalition, God told him, you will not need to fight in this battle. And so it happened. While the people sang praises, the enemies destroyed one another. This scene confirms that God's ideal never changed. The sword was only a temporary tool, worship was the eternal strategy. The expression, second best option, describes the patient pedagogy of God. He works with what we are, not only with what we should be. He descends to the level of our faith to gradually lift us toward his ideal. That is what he did with Israel. First he fought alone for them, then he allowed them to fight with his help, and finally he taught them that true victory was not territorial, but spiritual. At every stage his purpose remained the same: to form a people who would live trusting completely in his power. Joshua understood this truth when he summarized the history of the conquest. The Lord your God fought for you, Book of Joshua chapter 23 verse 3. That statement reveals the heart of the message. Even though the people's hands held the sword, the power came from heaven. No battle was won by human merit, every victory was evidence of grace. Israel fought, but God decided. Human effort without divine presence was useless, but active faith, even with imperfect weapons, was enough to bring down walls. Every Christian who looks at this story finds his or her own reflection. We too live between the ideal and the concession, between perfect faith and constant struggle. God, in his mercy, continues to work with us as he did with Israel. Sometimes he allows us to fight, not because he depends on our strength, but to teach us to depend more on him. The wars we face, spiritual, emotional, or moral, are opportunities to learn that without him, we cannot win. The sword in our hands only has meaning if his presence goes before us. Ultimately, the message of this study does not glorify war but grace. God does not abandon his perfect plan, he adapts it to save us within our imperfection. Thus, every battle becomes a call to return to the starting point, absolute trust in his power. The second best option reveals the infinite patience of a God who never tires of teaching, correcting, and fighting for us until we finally learn that his original plan has always been, and still is, the best. Join the conversation on my social networks, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and X. Sunday to Friday we share 2 daily questions at 2 p.m. and 8 p.m. They're an opportunity to reflect, learn together, and contribute to the study.